Hello again. We are now in chapter 7. My technical advisors have told me that it'd be better if I took the reading assignments in halves. There would not be so much for the technology to save. And so that's what I'm going to do. I'll take the chapters in sets of 3. Before I start today's reading discussion, we need to talk about Thomas Hardy's writing career. And Thomas Hardy starts out as a fiction writer. And he writes several novels, and they're all good, I think. The Return of the Native, The Maricaster Bridge, his classic that we're analyzing, Tess of the D'Urbervilles, and Jude the Obscure. But he's writing in Victorian England in the late 19th century. And in Victorian England, sex was something you didn't talk about or even mention. And that means that he has in his novels sexual undertones. He doesn't come right out and talk about it. He doesn't really get very graphic about it or anything like that, but it's there. And he took a lot of criticism and a lot of heat for this. By the time he writes Jude the Obscure, he gets so much criticism, he quits writing fiction altogether. And he becomes a poet. And if you can go back to our reading of The Darkling Thrush, he's a good poet. So this is his career. But I think Tess is his best book. And we're in chapter 7. And Tess, because of her guilt, because of her mother's playing the guilt card, has been manipulated and convinced to go visit their distant relative who's wealthy. So she comes downstairs and she's dressed in her ordinary weekday clothes, and Joan says, "No way, Tess. You got to put your best side outward." And Tess says, "But I'm going to work." And his mother says, "No, you've got to put your best side out. Go put your best dress on, your best bonnet on." And Tess is tractable. She will do whatever her mother says, so she puts on her best clothing. She gets dressed up for the event, because remember, Tess is tractable. Hardy writes that what she puts on imparted to her developing figure an amplitude which belied her age and might cause her to be estimated as a woman when she was not much more than a child. Tess is only 15 or 16 years old, and while she may have the figure of a woman, she's still a child. But Joan doesn't care about that, or about the holes in her stockings, because nobody sees your feet when your shoes are on. He'll never have the heart not to love her, Joan says. Well, will he love her, or will he use her? Now, there's a slight misgiving in Joan's mind. I guess her conscience somewhat works. But the only way she's going to show that she's got a slight misgiving is to walk out on the road with Tess before she sees her off into the wider world. Tells her kids she's going to marry our gentleman cousin. We're going to be rich. Okay. Before she leaves the house, Sir John, Jack D'Urberville, who's hungover as usual, tells her that he'll sell the family crest on that spoon. He starts out at 1,000 pounds and works his way down to 20 pounds. Says, you got to defend the family honor. This is how you defend the family honor? I don't think you have too much honor there, Jack. Okay. So the girls and the mother walk out on the road. Hardy says that it is a line of beauty flanked by innocence, backed by vanity. Well, Tess is the beauty. The little children are the innocence, and Joan is the vanity. We can see over the hills into the country that Tess is going to be taken to. It's like she's going to be taken to another planet. And out from a clump of trees shoots a vehicle. It's pretty smartly equipped. It's a little kind of a cart. It's varnished. And who's driving it but Alec d'Urberville? You get the feeling he's stalking her. He's parking behind that hedge just waiting to pick her up. And this is we could say he's in a sports car, if we think metaphorically. Mrs. D'Urberville asks herself, could she be deceived as to the meaning of this? So deception is already in the novel. And yeah, we're about to be deceived. Tess is still feeling like she doesn't want to do this, but she walks out to the cart, looks back at her family, and there they are, and they're poor, and she is driven by guilt to get into that cart with this guy. The little kids begin to cry. Joan begins to cry. And says, Joan does, I wouldn't let her go till I had found out whether the gentleman is really a good-hearted young man and interested in her as a kinswoman. And Joan is lying. She didn't bother to find out who he was. She doesn't know if he's a good man or if he's a decent person. And he's not. And she didn't bother at all. Joan is a poor excuse for her mother. And her husband is not much better. He's snoring away saying, yeah, you should have done that. And so Tess goes off. What's her trump card? Her mother says, her face. Well, will that card do the trick for her? Or will her face be only a minor part of her strong character? Chapter 8. Alec d'Urberville is a masterful manipulator because he speeds the cart up to drive as fast as he can so that he scares her. And she wishes he would slow down, and he's not gonna because he's driving. Okay, he's got a cigar in his mouth. And he can manage his horse, he says. This horse, I trained it, but it almost killed me. And we have a different minor theme in the novel. Female killing male. Might be foreshadowing. They're descending the hill. He's speeding up and is blowing the wind in her face. And he tells her, put your arm around my waist. Okay, here we go. He's manipulating her to have physical contact with him. That's why he's doing this. And she has to do it because she's afraid that she's going to get thrown 50 feet into the bushes. But she tells him to show some sense. He doesn't. He speeds up, then he slows down. He speeds up, then he slows down. And now he wants her to kiss him, and he wants to kiss her. Okay, now we're talking about rites of passage. And we hope that when we have our first kiss, it's tender, gentle, and loving. And we know this one, her first kiss, will not be so because it's forced. And anytime she does something in the least bit friendly, he interprets it as flirting. Tess doesn't know how to flirt. She doesn't know how to spell the word flirtatious. She hasn't a clue about it. She's too innocent. She's too young. But he is pressing on her, and he believes that she's flirting with him. She's not. And he's driving so fast, he wants to break both their necks. And he starts to get down to this kiss thing. She says, I don't want anybody to kiss me, sir. She's not ready. She doesn't want that. So, driving fast, driving slow, he gives her the kiss of mastery. He's going to master her. Okay. She wipes the spot off her cheek. She's disgusted by it. She should be. She has a hat on her head. And so she's pretty smart. She lets it blow. She forces it to blow off her head just so he'll stop and she can get out of the cart. And he says, you look pretty with it off. And she decides, I'll walk. Well, that's a good idea to Trantridge. It's 5 or 6 miles, he says. No, I'll walk. I hate and detest you, she says. She should. I don't like him at all. I'll go back to mother, I will. Well, on one end you've got a mother who doesn't care about you, and you got this guy on the other end. I think if I were you, I'd just head off in a completely different direction altogether. She cannot be induced to remount, and so her resolve stays, and she walks to Trantridge, and she gets there. We're now in chapter 9. All of us have a first job. Mine was as a busboy, clearing tables. Sometimes you have to work hard at these jobs. Sometimes you don't have to work that hard. This is Tess's first job outside of her home, and it's very, very unproductive and very undemanding. She has too much free time on her hands. This is a house, the d'Urberville house, the Stokes house, which shows that the old family of the D'Urbervilles really have disappeared and gone under, and that what it's been replaced by is this weirdness. Because Mrs. Stokes D'Urberville, Alec's mother, is eccentric. She's blind, she's strange. Her best pastime, is to have the maids in the house bring her birds that she can hold on her lap and stroke. And she apparently cares more about birds than she does about human beings. And we see that these rich people are totally useless. They have nothing to do all day. Alec doesn't have a job. His mother never had a job. So money is now what determines the new aristocracy. If you've got money, you're in the upper class. It's got nothing to do with birth, nothing to do with honor, nothing to do with any of that at all. It's just money that determines it. And so we got a blind, wealthy woman who's useless. She doesn't do anything all day. She sits in her room and she strokes birds and chickens. And that's what she does. So this is a useless, unproductive job. The old lady is blind. Mrs. is an old lady and blind. She can't see, but she knows about her son. And so they bring her the birds, and she talks to Tess a little bit. And can you whistle? Tess can kind of whistle, but in this job, you got to whistle to the birds to keep them happy. And Tess is going to have to do that. Tess could whistle. The accomplishment was one which she did not care to profess in genteel company. She doesn't whistle very much. One of the other maids said, well, your son whistled to him this morning. And Mrs. D'Urberville makes a face. She does not like her son. She resents him. She makes a face of repugnance, like, ew. She doesn't like the guy. He's not likable. And Tess sees this. Tess is perceptive. She's not as dumb as some people think she is. With all this freedom and free time on her hands, she doesn't have much to do. And of course, Mr. Stalker, he's still stalking her, and he sees her trying to whistle, so he decides he will teach her. I'll give you a lesson or two. She doesn't want him to give her a lesson. I wouldn't want him to give her a lesson either. I don't want to touch you, she says. Okay. But he does succeed in getting her to whistle. And the minute she whistles, she smiles. And he interprets that as, oh, she really likes me. In other words, she's turning into a flirt right in front of his eyes. No, she doesn't flirt with him at all. She doesn't like him. He knows his mother doesn't like him either. And so a familiarity with Alec D'Urberville's presence, which that young man carefully cultivated in her by playful dialogue and by jestingly calling her his cousin when they were alone, removed most of her original shyness of him, without, however, implanting any feeling which could engender shyness of a new and tenderer kind. She's a little more comfortable with him. She's a little less shy, but she's not in love with him and she's not attracted to him. And so we are in chapter 10. And by the way, at the end of chapter 9, she's in the room with Mrs. D'Urberville handing her the birds. There's a pair of shoes showing under the curtain in the room. He's following Tess around, hiding in the closet, watching her. Chapter 10. I always have in my notes here that Tess's father would be right at home in this town. Why? Well, okay. The village of Trantridge, like all villages, has its customs and its weird habits. And the weird habit of this village is everybody drinks hard. We're in a group of career alcoholics. The simple conversation on the farms is not about saving money for something else. It's about how we're going to get loaded on Friday night. That's what they do. And so they head into town on Saturday night, and their chief pleasure is to drink, and they get to dance, and then they sleep it off on Sunday morning. So they're not in church attending to their spirit on Sunday morning. They are suffering from the spirits they had on Saturday night. Tess gives in to peer pressure from the women who aren't much older than she is to go along into the town. And so they walk into the town. And Tess, of course, being beautiful, her appearance draws sly, crude remarks from men. Beauty has its price. Tess is not part of this crowd at all. She doesn't drink. She's not a dancer. Why she goes along, we're not sure. Just, I guess she goes along because she gives in to peer pressure. She can't learn to say no. And so here she is sitting outside a barn where the drinking and the dancing are going on. And here he is again, Alec d'Urberville, who has followed her here, of course, and offers to take her home on his horse. And she doesn't want to go. And he calls her silly girl. That's almost just like telling her, oh, you're so stupid, staying here like this. So she stays there. Party's over, and we're walking home at dawn. And Hardy writes, they followed the road along in a supporting medium possessed of original and profound thoughts, themselves and surrounding nature forming an organism of which all the parts harmoniously and joyously interpenetrated each other. They are high as kites on alcohol, and everything seems so wonderful. It will for a while, but not for long. Among them are some women. Car Darch is there. She's also got another nickname, Queen of Spades. And it turns out she used to be Alec d'Urberville's favorite. Oh, okay. All right. Now we know what's going on. He's trying to line the women up and, do things with them one after the other. He's trying to have as many conquests as he can. So Car Darch might have been, who knows, in the line. So Tess isn't the first. So they're walking along, and the head of the procession is Car Darch. She's pretty tough, kind of nasty. And she's got a basket on her head, and in it is a jar of what's called treacle. I guess it's molasses. And the jar somehow has gotten fractured, and the treacle is running down her back, and one of the women walks up behind her and puts her fingers in her dress and tastes it and says, that's treacle running down your back. Everybody starts to laugh. It's really funny. And Tess laughs too. It's funny. So she can't help joining in. Well, that's the misfortune, because here's where the trouble starts. Well, Car Darch sees her laughing and stands up and says, thus think the best everybody, because the best first favorite with he just now. Which is saying, you think you're hot stuff because you're his squee-main girl right now, huh? And she takes off her bodice like she wants to square off and fight and box Tess. And Tess here says, no, I'm not going to fight with you. She also says, if I'd have known what kind of people you were, I never would have come along on this expedition in the first place. There's a lot of yelling going on. Remember, everybody's under the influence of alcohol. Tess is indignant. She's ashamed. I don't know why she's ashamed. These are a bunch of lowlifes. When who rides up on his horse? It's the man on the horse, Alec d'Urberville. And he's a social superior. So when he says, what the devil is all this row about, work folk, he puts them all in their place. And the trouble stops like that. And he turns to her and says, get up on my horse. Well, okay, you're in a tight situation. You want to get out of it any which way you can. Tess gets up on his horse and rides away. The Queen of Spades and the Queen of Diamonds, they're sisters, laugh a little bit. And one of the men says, out of the frying pan, into the fire. It's an old saying, but what it means is you're out of one bad situation into a way worse one. That's where you're headed. Chapter 11.